Hello.
Welcome, everybody. It's a Thursday night. Let's sketch
Yes.
up with Mog and Mel. We've got an exciting guest here tonight. Daryl Skelton is with us, veteran artist of 52 years. We also have Jen Leonard is back with us. Always happy to have her. So don't go away. Stay right there. We'll be right back after this brief break. Hey there, everybody. Thanks again for joining us on SketchUp. Welcome, Derek Neiman and Mike Cuevas. Nice to have you guys on here. Tonight we have Daryl Skelton, veteran artist of 52 years, who's, you can say he's been around the block a few times, and we're happy to have him, and can't wait to hear some of the things that he might have to say. And of course, joining us, drawing her beautiful art, this time with the Breathless Mahoney, is Jen Leonard. How are you doing, Jen?
Doing good.
That's great. That's great. Stevie B, nice to see you in the house. Guess the convention went well. You got some nice content.
Wow. You got some tent?
Wow.
Well.
I didn't know I got it. It's hard to do when you're inside a con, but we try to do what we can. But anyway, Daryl, how are you doing tonight?
Yes.
Master. Not too shabby. It's my morning, actually. I went to bed about 9 o'clock this morning, I guess. And my world is kind of topsy-turvy most of the time, except when I go to shows. And then, of course, I have to have a 9-to-5 humanoid schedule.
So like many artists, you are a vampire.
Yeah. My body clock has kind of always worked that way. And having 3 kids, when they were growing up, I had to have more of a normal schedule, but I'd always find myself taking naps during the day, kind of dragging through. And no matter how much or how little sleep I've had, around 9 o'clock at night, I just start to perk up. And now that we're empty nesters, Marsha's kind of adopted the same kind of schedule, much to her chagrin. But it works out well for us. I sleep 8 hours, get up, do stuff. So it's just kind of naturally happened that way. I'd rather not now, because as you get older, you see a lot of doctors all the time, and they don't work nights.
Do you by any chance have low blood pressure?
Yes. No. I had it for most of my life.
Right? Yeah.
And then a few years ago, it went up to high blood pressure.
Okay.
Just like that.
Yeah, I was reading a medical, I don't know why, but a journal once, but they talked about how low blood pressure people, they tend to have such a hard time waking up. It takes longer for them to get into so morning is like hell for them, or just like after they sleep, and they tend to be vampires. So maybe that's why, I don't know.
Yeah, it's just always kind of been that way. And again, most of my life I did have low blood pressure, but if I obey my body clock, I wake up refreshed. I don't have to take naps. I'm good to go. And when I have to do the regular rest of the world schedule, that's when I kind of like drag.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, I kind of feel for you, because I'm there now. I'm an early riser. I get up early and I start like working right away. But however, as I've gotten older, especially now, because I'm 65 now, and it takes. I don't get up as early. I'm getting like 9. Sometimes I don't get up until noon, and I do like to take my naps, right? Because it is hard for me to continue on with the work schedule that I have to keep it going. So I will take a nap most of the time, just so that I can work those late hours. And I'm working until about like 2 o'clock in the morning before I go back to sleep. It's like I should be going to sleep at 12, but I'm always like doing something, trying to get something done.
Yeah.
I always feel like there's never enough time to do what I need to do.
Yeah.
But,
When I get up away from the table, that's when I collapse. I don't realize how late it is or early it is or anything until it happens.
Yeah.
Also, one thing I've noticed is I'm 71 now, and I really have to watch it because then I start talking about my health issues and my medications. and most of my peers do the same thing, you know.
Oh, don't get me started. I can jump in there too.
Hey, if you heard about this new doctor, you know.
I'll go round with people 3 times my age on medications and ailments lists. Okay.
I've got a handful of medication that I have to take, and I always have to pay attention. Okay, I gotta take this at this time. I gotta take this at this time. You know, I was like, oh, okay, and this one is only half a pill. So, Jesus Christ, man.
Well, I take mine at certain times too. And I was afraid I'd have to set an alarm clock or something, but instead I find out my prostate wakes me up with great regularity. And bingo, it's time for this pill.
Oh yeah. Sometime Mog hears me like getting up, and I'm kind of like making a little dash. He goes, what happened? I had to go. What can I say?
Yeah.
So
that's
I'm
the other
37.
Yeah.
I'm 37 and I have so many pills. They have to send each batch in little containers because I don't even know what I take anymore. There's so many of them. They just send them in a little packet that I tear the top off and shoot them. And I go to the doctor and they're like, "Are you still on?" Blah, blah, blah? I go, "I don't know. What color is it?"
Oh my God.
They've asked me that so many times. I just took pictures of it. Okay, hey, this is what I'm taking, man. Okay, I take this at this time. I take this at this time.
That's actually not very funny, Kyle, but yeah.
First of all, I can't remember the names. And on top of that, I can't even pronounce some of that stuff that they're giving me.
Yeah.
And they want me to tell them what I'm taking.
Yeah.
They should just give them like nicknames or something that would be easier to remember.
Yeah, well, there's P-pill, there's
Oh no.
put on the list. I'll stop right there.
I do like that pee pill because that tells me that's the one that kind of gets me to pee a little more often.
Hey.
Anyway, I digress. We've digressed a lot. So, Daryl, you were working on the Dallas series. Was that your first professional gig?
No, I started out as a fashion illustrator.
Whoa.
And I at the same time, I had a local comic strip in my hometown newspaper, which was a great discipline because it taught me to get things in on time and deadline and all that. And after 2 years, they decided that clip art, you talk about AI today, clip art was the AI of that period.
Right.
And they figured out they could, use clip art, and it was much cheaper than hiring me. Mm-hmm. So I kind of looked all over the Midwest. I'm originally from Nebraska. And I tried to find something. I went to Denver, Kansas City, Minneapolis, and couldn't find anything. And I didn't realize that the idea of clip art had kind of caught on. And so I came out to Santa Monica, and I did sketches, portraits in the Topanga Canyon Mall. And it was pure commission work, and it was not doing too well. But the guy there had just acquired a concession at the then New Aladdin Hotel in Las Vegas. So I went there and did that. And then got to know a guy who came around who had who started an animation studio. And I got to be an art director, and it was a dark time in our country's history known as the disco era. And we animated disco songs to be played in discos on the wall, like Rubber Band Man and so on. And I did that for that company and also for Greyhound. The bus people also did the animation work and convention work. Then I went to do newspaper work, and I ended up doing the Sunday magazine covers for the Las Vegas Sun. And that's where I got to meet a lot of famous people of the day, and they liked my work, and did that for a while. Then I wanted to do comics, and so in 1980 I went to the San Diego Comic Convention, and much to my surprise and delight, Jim Steranko offered me a job if I moved
Wow.
to New York. If I moved to New York.
Okay.
And I was just starting to date my wife at the time. I had bought my first place, and I just didn't want to go to New York. And Rich Buckler did the same thing.
Okay.
And I had to turn that down. And in the intervening time, I interviewed with a guy who was an editor for the LA Times Syndicate. And 1 full year later, he called me in Las Vegas and offered me a chance to audition for the Dallas job. Now, Dallas was a huge deal at the time on television.
Oh, hell yeah, it is.
Yeah, very little competition, you know, from streaming, cable, videotape, whatever. And so just like in the years before, like the Beatles appearing on Ed Sullivan, the Adam West Batman TV show, when something hit big, it hit nationwide because there were very few options other than the 3 channels on television.
Yeah, Dallas dominated everything. It was on the talk shows. It was on the tabloids. It was in the newspapers. It was even the newscasters would talk about it, mention about it at the end of their show. That phrase, "Who shot JR?" was a resounding phrase that went around the country so many times.
Even Billy Graham at one of his crusades in Las Vegas said, "Everybody wants to know who shot JR. I'll tell you who shot JR. A sinner shot JR." So it was a big deal.
It was a big deal.
I had not seen the show, you know, before I got offered the job, and I had to do a couple of audition strips. So again, in the pre-internet, pre-computer days, I had to go down to the library and go through all the People magazines and figure out who was who. But my parents were huge fans, and they were thrilled, you know, when they heard I got to audition for it. And then when I got the gig, I called up my parents and I said, you know, "Hey, I got the job with the Syndicate." And my mom goes, "Oh, Daryl, you don't want to work with those people," thinking that I was a mobbed up cartoonist. And I go, no, it's a different kind of syndicate. And so I did that, and it was nice because I had done, and this is something it took me years to figure out, how art jobs tend to lead to other art jobs, and you use those skills. I'd started out as a fashion illustrator. Well, in Dallas, I had to draw high fashion. I had to draw likenesses of Larry Hagman and the crew. And I had done portraits in the Topanga Canyon Mall. And so I found over the years, I kept wondering, you know, because I would work on a job for a few years and then it would end. And then I'd go on to something else that I'd never done before. And at the time I thought, oh no, I can't hold a job longer than 2 years anywhere. And until I realized, looking back, I was never really out of work. I was just doing something different in the art field. And the Dallas job got me some notoriety and showed that I could do likenesses. It showed I could do a deadline, because with a daily strip, there's no such thing as a sick day. And so it was really a good experience. And by the time DC Comics had figured out, because they had been going to the Philippines for artists.
Yeah.
Because Neil Adams was threatening to organize the artists.
Right.
And so they started dealing with the Philippines. And after a while, when the threat of the organization and the strike disappeared, they figured, well, wait a minute, this is before FedEx or anything. They were just using the US mails to go to the Philippines.
Yep.
So they figured, well, I guess we can have somebody in Las Vegas not have to move to New York. So I started getting work at DC Comics and did that for a while. in the later 80s, I moved to Marvel. Jim Shooter hired me. But right before he hired me, he was having his problems there and he was fired. And so I was not long for the Marvel world at that point. So I went and I did mural work in Las Vegas. There was a guy, a friend of mine, we did murals and they would be rolled up and shipped off to New York or wherever. And I did that until there was a fire in the studio. And I got a lungful of smoke of chemicals and got pneumonia right away. After I recovered from the pneumonia, I found that I was allergic to, if not oil paints, the things we would use, Japan Dryer, Liquid. And I had to quit doing oils. And so then I went back to comics and went to Marvel in 1990 and did a bunch of stuff there until DC Comics called, and they had the license for the Star Trek. And so I did an issue of Star Trek, and then I signed a contract to do Star Trek Next Generation, and did that for a while. At the same time, did some Wonder Woman. And one thing that I didn't realize until later how big it was, and that was Prince. When Prince changed his name to a symbol, he launched that symbol in a comic book.
Yeah.
And so I didn't design it at all, but I was the first guy to draw this symbol that showed that Prince had changed his name to this symbol. And that, again, like I said, I had no idea at the time, because I would go to conventions and I'd have some original artwork or something, and I'd have a comic, and Prince, you know, he was all over the place. And so that was a fun deal. I found out later on he would call the editor up, but he would have his assistant call, and the assistant would say, Prince will call you in 1 hour. Prince will call you in 45 minutes. Prince will call you in a half hour. Prince will call you in 15 minutes. You know, Prince is on the line. And Prince kind of got into the comic. He had a friend, Kirstie Alley, the actress.
Yeah.
And he wanted her. There was a reporter character in the story, and he wanted it to look like Kirstie Alley. And usually, you know, you have contracts for that sort of thing. You sign likeness approvals and you figure out percentages and all. But no, Prince wanted Kirstie Alley, so we did Kirstie Alley. Okay. Prince calls up the editor and doesn't use his assistant to pave the way, and says, "Hi, this is Prince." And my editor goes, "Oh yeah, right." And did that twice. And finally, there's a call with the assistant going, "Why do you keep hanging up on Prince?" Well, you didn't tell me he was going to call in 15 minutes or whatever. And so that was a fun project, one that I just kind of did and didn't think that much about it at the time, but have since realized that how big Prince was in the general public. I mean, it would gather a lot of attention.
Wow. I can't hear anything. This is not good. I can't see what's going on, if I need to respond or not. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Where's the sound?
You can. He just stopped talking. You need to.
Oh, I can. I've got tons of stories.
He thought there was no sound, and y'all was sounding concerned.
All right. So Mog pulled up this other screen, so I couldn't see anything. So I have no idea like what is going on.
Yeah. Well, the
that,
problem,
and I hate it.
Yeah. Well, at this age, again, if I don't start talking about my medical and my pills and stuff, I start talking about stuff that happened over the years with different things. And I found that the art career was really good in meeting people. I met a lot of, television and motion picture stars over that, who liked the work that I did, especially for the Sunday magazine sections. But the things that would make me nervous was when I would get to meet like Jack Kirby.
Oh.
Gene Colan, and so on, and other people associated with the industry. I had done in Las Vegas, the Sands Hotel had their 35th anniversary in '85, wow. And I did a poster for that, and I took it to San Diego with me, hoping to find some painted cover work. Again, this is in the pre-computer days, and I was carrying it around, and Julie Newmar was sitting at her table, getting ready to sign autographs, and she saw it, and that poster, that was in her time period, in her wheelhouse.
Okay.
And so she wanted to see it. And so we sat down and we went over it, and it was mostly stars from the 50s. And I told her, the first time I'd seen her was in Little Abner. She played Stupefying Jones. Okay. And then I saw her in Seven Brides for Seven Brothers. And I think she was that I knew her out.
Wow.
Yeah. She was one of the Sabin women.
Okay.
And I think she was impressed that I knew her outside of Batman and the Monkees. But anyway, when it was time to finish, people were lining up, and I said, "Well, it's been nice talking to you." And she goes, "Oh no, sit down here."
What?
Yeah, I know. So I sat down next to her, and all these aging fanboys were shooting me dirty looks because I was monopolizing Julie's time.
Wow.
At one point, I said, the writer Stanley Ralph Ross, I said, I thought his writing on Batman really suited your comedic timing.
Yeah.
And she drummed her fingers and said, "My, weren't you the observant little boy?"
Oh my God.
So, attendant to that, you flash forward a bunch of years. I was in Las Vegas. I think it was 2017.
Okay.
And somebody had me do a cover because Adam West had just passed away, and unexpectedly so. He was supposed to be at that convention. Oh. And so I was asked to do a cover at first of Adam West and Burt Ward. Well, they switched it to the two Catwomen who had been in the first ones, Julie Newmar and Lee Merriweather. Mm-hmm. And so I did this cover, and the guy went and had it autographed and came back and said, "Oh, it was a big hit." He was worried because Julie kept touching it because I had her in the traditional Catwoman costume with the glitter on it, and I put Lee Merriweather in her Miss Kitka outfit from the Batman '66 movie.
Yeah.
And so I was glad they got to see it. And we're sitting there, Marcia and I are in our booth, and around, looking down the aisles up and down, is Lee Merriweather. And she liked the cover so much that she wanted to meet me. So she came up and talked, and we took pictures and everything, and it was really interesting. So, that I was hoping that, in another 30 years, another one of the Catwoman would come up and want that. So I've got one more to go for the Batman '89 movie, and then I'm caught up in my Catwoman. But It was just that, and at the time, a lot of the references I use will seem really dated, because that's when I really hit my stride doing the cover work. And so I would get calls and get to go to a show and then go backstage. And so Liberace called, and Shecky Green, and can't say it much these days. Bill Cosby liked the work. He didn't give Marcia a drink or anything. He seemed really nice. So I was kind of surprised later on, but it was just, it was just fun meeting those people. But like I said, the things that really hit me and made me a little flummoxed was seeing, like Jack Kirby and having dinner with he and Roz, and getting to talk with him, and Gene Colan and Kurt Schaffenberger and Jerry Robinson. And those were my stars that I wanted to meet. And
I know who you speak of, but I know a lot of people are not. So I'm totally mesmerized.
What?
But just sitting next to Julie Newmar, Jesus Christ, what a lucky break that was there.
Well, she was
more than Julie Newmar. It was more like Jack Kirby. What was his personality like? Was he intimidating?
No, he was. That was the thing. I did later on. I did work for Stan Lee, and Stan at that point had become Stan Lee.
Yeah.
So that you didn't. I mean, I talked to his daughter, and I would find out information because his daughter called me up and wanted some posters and such. But Jack was just so down to earth, and we spend most of our time. He told me stories about World War II.
Oh.
And that's what I found interesting. The comic stuff we touched on. He said that when he first went to DC, his idea was he wanted to write and draw New Gods, but he wanted Don Heck to draw Forever People that he would write, that Jack would write. And Steve Ditko was going to do Mr. Miracle. And I said, oh, I thought Steve Ditko would be a good fit for Mr. Miracle. And Jack said, yes, he's a fine draftsman. And Roz, his wife, didn't have a filter, and she said, but all of his people look Polish. And so that's what you would do. Jack would say something, and it would be, very nice and very polite, and then Roz would give you what she really thought, and they complemented each other so well.
Wow.
And to see them work, they were truly a team. Well, like you guys and Gene Colan and his wife. I noticed most of my idols had their wives there as the gatekeepers. Matter of fact, the aforementioned 35th anniversary Sands poster, I don't know if I would have gotten to talk to Gene if his wife hadn't seen that. And his wife was younger than Gene, and she was nightclub maven or whatever, and she was impressed with seeing that, and so that got me in to see Gene. Whereas usually, you're gonna have to buy something, you're gonna have to do this, you're gonna have to do that, and he may say hi to you or something. But because she was impressed by that, it got me in to see Gene Colan, and so he was a lot of fun. And I found that I got with a lot of these people, Carmen Infantino and others. Having grown up with their work and seen inkers and things, you'd always have questions. You were wondering what things were really like back then. And you get to know that. And that's what I found fascinating. Like, I haven't heard anybody else say anything about Jack's time at DC that he was planning on having others draw his writings. And he had ideas that unfortunately they didn't get listened to, because the idea, I think, when they got Jack was let's get Jack away from Marvel and Marvel will collapse. And so they just wanted Jack to crank out 12-cent comic books.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And Jack had ideas for graphic novels, which weren't done yet. And he had ideas for limited series, I think he wanted just to have the New Gods, Mr. Miracle and Forever People, just run a finite course, and have it end. And, users don't do that. And so he was, even then, he was too revolutionary for comics. He was coming up with ideas that they didn't have the nerve to do. And I found that to be true, that people get into an idea of what is cool, and don't think of what can be.
Yeah.
There's a lack of imagination when it comes to coming up with projects, because you just go with what sells. Well, that kind of thinking has kind of led the industry down a path where, the old formula doesn't work anymore.
Yeah, I agree.
Thankfully, independents have come along, and they allow creators to do things. And even though you don't necessarily make the money you would back in the day, you have a freedom to develop something, and you have an idea that you can, because thanks to desktop publishing, you can produce something and sink or swim, it's all yours. And so that's something that seeing how Jack was treated and others were treated, it made a difference to me going in, that I knew if I had a great idea, I wasn't about to give it to Marvel or DC. But
Oh,
knowing that, I got to draw comic books. I got to draw characters I loved. I realized that, this is the way it is now. And so I wasn't, I went in with open eyes, whereas I think Jack and Steve Ditko and others would produce things because they had to, Jack had a family to feed. And so he would come up with something. And because of the way the system worked, you had to buy press time. Companies would, everything was published except for Charlton out of Sparta, Illinois. And they had these giant printers that were so big, they would bring the printing presses in, then they would build the building around it. And you would buy press time. And because of the way that went, Daredevil was supposed to come out in the summer of '63. But the artist had deadline problems because he also had a job as an art director in Connecticut or something. And he wasn't going to make his deadline.
Yeah.
And so they had purchased the press time. So Stan went to Jack, hey, Jack, we need something to fill this press time. And so Jack just did X-Men out of nowhere. Just, okay, it's due. Here's the deadline. Now you've got a comic book to fill that press time. And we have the X-Men because Jack had to do something quick over the weekend to make sure Marvel Comics wouldn't lose thousands of dollars on the presses.
Wow.
So, yeah. So, every time the industry changes, the reason for those things happen. When Eastman and Laird wanted to do a satire of characters in Daredevil, they drew it up in black and white and took it to Frank Miller, who just, and it was Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. And that took off because the industry had changed to where they didn't want to see new things like that. And so now there's opportunities. And if you're someone like me who wants to make a living doing comic books and you want to work for the big two, it's changed so much. I mean, and because of the internet, when I was doing it, we would do pages, like this. This is a Blue Beetle page, and it would be black and white. You would first do like 8 page segments, send it off to New York in FedEx, send it overnight. They would send back after having the pages hand lettered in Connecticut, send another overnight mailing to Connecticut and back to me, who would ink it.
Oh.
And
then I would send it back in, and it was all overnight mail.
Yeah.
And at the time, I had gotten my first computer, and I approached it like, oh, wait a minute. Since I'm the inker, I was just doing my sketches on 8.5 by 11 vellum. And then I would scan it into the computer and print it out in like a 20% Scion, which is the non-repro blue. The camera couldn't see it. And print it out and send it off. And they would hand letter it, send it back to me, and then I would just ink it. And I wouldn't have to erase anything. I could make changes on the fly.
Yeah.
And no one had ever seen that before, because this is like 1993.
Yeah.
And so the letterers thought I was the computer guy in comics, when all I knew how to do was turn on my computer, scan my stuff in, and print it out.
Oh my God.
But I did that, and I got the idea. I talked to my editor and I said, you know what? If you have a computer and a modem, it probably would take all night to send one page. But I could save you overnight mailing costs and overnight mail by sending you the pages, and you could have them lettered and sent back to me. And that would cut out, several overnight mailings. And I was told that no, down in production, they work with stone knives and bearskin rugs, and that just wasn't done. Well, since then, of course, that's what they do. And since they can take advantage of going to Europe, South America, wherever, they can get people who are working for a lot less money. Yeah. And since sales are down, I found over the years after I left, I quit doing regular comic books, and I would get offers from editors, wanting me to do stuff. And I would tell them how much I wanted, and I wouldn't hear back again until finally I was talking, this is years ago now, to Jeremy Clark in Phoenix at a convention, and he had me he was doing some charity stuff, so I did a Hulk sketch for him. And in talking to him, I found out people in the industry are making 1/3 to 2/3 of what I made 25 years ago.
Wow.
And because they can access people anywhere in the world, yeah, and you'll have somebody that'll work. And it's kind of like, the nightmare people had back in the 70s with going to the Philippines and getting artists to work for cheap. Mm-hmm. And so that's a huge industry change. And I was at a convention in Las Vegas one time, and there was a guy there who was working on Superman, and he was selling his originals, and he was doing well. And I asked him, well, what else do you do besides comics? And he goes, oh, no, nothing. And I thought, yikes, the way the industry is changing, you should, learn how to be a plumber or something.
Yeah.
Yeah, the competition is stiff with the international market. I mean, we see that they're paying $150, I think, now for sequential pages, but there's guys out there that'll from other countries that'll kick them out, and they're really nice. They'll do it for $40, and that's a tough thing to compete with. Anyway, we're going to need to take a break here, but however, before we do that, let's go around the block and see what everybody has, what they're drawing here. Mog is working on a Moon Knight, and we're still looking for a bid of $100 on that. And Jen has gotten way ahead on her Breathless. Mahoney, that hair is looking really good, very, very fluffy, on a Dick Tracy cover. And that's
Storm.
She's got 105 on it now, so we're looking for the next bid on that. And Daryl.
Daryl, can we see yours?
Sue Storm. I've been yammering, so
and that's fine. We're enjoying your hearing the stories. It's very interesting. If you get it, you get it. If not, don't worry too much about it. But yeah, we'll eventually we'll get to that. And we will. And on that note, we're going to go ahead and take this commercial break, and we will be right back.
According to a statistic that I just made up, people spend 4 hours a day changing the television channel. People who watch The Experience don't do that. Save yourself a ton of time by tuning into The Experience and enjoying our new original programming 7 days a week. And then tell your friends. Think about the money they could save on batteries in the remote alone just by tuning into The Experience. Find out more by scanning the QR code below.
Sure, comic books are beautiful, but underneath, there's something more authentic and exciting. The original art. See the pencils, the lines, the shading, as if you were there in the studio watching the artist work. Getting a peek at comics' backstage is easy with the original art experience.
All right, Friday night, guys. Thank you for being here. could be doing anything. The fact that you're here means the world to me.
Nick's pieces are always value priced with your budget in mind, for the beginning collector to the veteran.
And this is gorgeous. You got Aquaman and Mira.
Join the original art experience with Nick and our friendly crew of regulars, even if it's just to enjoy the art. Fridays at 7. It's all part of the experience. FOC, a comic industry term for the final day a new comic can be ordered by a local comic shop. So, what does that mean to you? Well, it's your last chance to order a new comic book from your local comic shop. Order up! The FOC show will go over every book that's about to be cut off every Friday afternoon.
I'm going to highlight some of the stuff that I think is really worth paying attention to,
so that you can put in an order at your LCS for as many copies or as many variant covers as you want.
Sometimes the store needs to know to up their orders.
Never miss out on a popular comic again. Order up, part of the experience.
Welcome back, everybody. Thanks again for joining us on SketchUp. Are we muted?
No, we're not muted.
Okay, so all right. So we have Daryl Skelton, who's got it started, and he's bringing up a lot of events and people that some of you may not know, but a lot of legendary people. Hi, Katie. Thanks for dropping by. I appreciate you covering the show last week. I did watch it. And it was a good show. I liked the topics that you guys talked about. There was two that I personally like. You brought up the Labyrinth and Judge Dredd. So I was really, really interested in those topics. Okay, so and we have Jen Leonard with us tonight, along with Daryl Skelton. And Jen is drawing Breathless Mahoney. And a lot of people may not know that character because it goes way back then. But I was talking to Jen earlier, and she was talking about like how a lot of people don't know that character, and I'm not surprised. But Jen, how do you know Dick Tracy? Were you a fan of the series?
My dad actually grew up a huge fan, so he made sure I knew what it was growing up.
So your dad was a big detective fan?
Yeah, I actually remember going to the theater to see the movie when it came out, and he started telling me all about the comics. So.
Was he into comics too?
He denies it, but I tell him he has an inside geek that's in the closet that's threatening to come out at any given moment. So.
Now, were you a fan of the Dallas series? Did you watch that at all?
I remember seeing it all when my mom was home because she'd watch it, but I don't remember a whole lot about it.
I wasn't really that interested in Dallas myself. In fact, the only reason why I started watching it is because I was watching another series called Man from Atlantis, and that's where Patrick Duffy got his start before he got onto Dallas, and I really, really liked that series as a kid. You're so interested in something like, what, a man from Atlantis? Yeah, how is this possible? But this guy washes up on the shore and he doesn't know where he's from. He's got amnesia, can't remember, but he can swim like a freaking dolphin. And being a beach boy myself, I was like really into that. I wanted to know more. I was already into comics as well. And the cool thing is that Marvel actually had created a Man from Atlantis comic book series too. And I got into that as well. And I love the art in it. But unfortunately, both the series and the comic got canceled. Right. So I followed Patrick over to Dallas. And it was interesting for a couple of seasons, but it was hard for me to watch because at that time I was already going to college. Right. And college interrupted a lot of things, including my comic book collecting. So when I finished college, I had to spend a lot of time catching up with it and everything. But so that was impressive of how Patrick Duffy got onto that series. And he was on there for I don't know, for a very, very long time throughout the series, and well-known character that he played on there. Did you end up liking this series at all, Daryl, or was it just something that you just did?
I enjoyed the plotting. I thought was quite good. Some of the dialogue after a while. I worked with a guy named Jim Lawrence, who was the writer on the strip, and he was very good because people don't understand the differences between different kinds of writing. In the comic strip, you have like 3 panels a day if you're lucky. And he would encapsulate the personality of the characters with just a turn of a phrase. And so I found that fascinating. But the plotting on Dallas was actually rather good. It seemed like something that,
Oh yeah,
on the surface, when I first saw it, I just thought this is something, from my parents' generation. But it ended up being, I thought, well developed. And so we had a thing going on with the strip where we would refer to events on the show, but not actually try to keep up with it because it was, coming out. We were working like 6 to 8 weeks ahead on the strip. So you had to capture the flavor of the show because we're dealing with an audience. And I had the same thing with Star Trek. I was mindful that there were people who just read comics and there were people who loved that show. And so I had to really walk that line where you wanted to make comic book people happy or comic strip people happy and keep the people from the show happy.
Yeah. They had some of the best cliffhangers that just had you biting and gritting your teeth at the end of every season, right? Every summer it was Dallas this, that, JR and the Ewings and everything. That's all I ever heard. It was like I said, it was like they were talking about everywhere. At that time, I was going to college and working in this ice cream shop, and people would come into the ice cream shop, sit down, and that's what their conversation was about. Was about JR and the Ewings. So it was a very phenomenal show that just took over the daily lives of everybody during that time. And haven't seen too much more like it. I think Game of Thrones comes pretty close to that. Now you were Star Trek. When you got on Star Trek, were you on the very beginning of that?
No, there were other artists that were first worked on it, and I came along. I'm trying to think of which season it was. It was probably one of the first Borg things, a major Borg things.
Okay.
Wow,
that's a good time to come on.
Yeah, they had a cliffhanger as well at the time.
Yeah.
And so the thing that was really good about that show and the comic book is there was great coordination between the two.
Yeah.
I had to make sure that the pips that they wore for their rank had to match what was going to be on the show 3 months from then. And so, we did that, and we had characters that were more obscure, that were fan favorites.
Yeah.
That we got to explore more of their story arc. Ensign Rowe, for instance, on the TV show, at one point she just decides, well, I'm going off to Starfleet. Well, we had the luxury of a 3-issue story arc showing what led her to that decision. And it was very fundamental to the character because, her character had been oppressed by the Cardassians, and there was like a Beauty and the Beast scenario where there was somebody with a hood that she couldn't see that was very kind to her and saved her life and gave his life up for hers. And the big reveal at the end of the 3rd issue was that was a Cardassian. And so it deeply affected her. And made her more into Starfleet and made her want to go to the Academy. And so also another thing, the writer, Michael Jan Friedman, wrote a lot of the novels. And he brought characters from the novels into the comic book from the show and from the novels.
Yep.
And there was one character, it was a Japanese lieutenant who had a daughter, Lieutenant Nakamura.
Yep.
And at the time, everybody in the show had to look like they looked. And if you brought in an ancillary character, you would have to make sure that it looked like a real person. And I used my wife, Marcia, as the model for that. And so she was in it, and my daughter was in it. And I noticed IDW is now doing Star Trek Next Generation, and her character is still around.
Nice.
Doing that. And there was, on the Stargazer, Picard's first #1 was a character. I based him off of a friend of mine who was an anchor for the local NBC affiliate and put him in there. And so he's in it. And we would go to shows and people would bring books for me to sign. And somebody noticed that Marcia was in the comic and they wanted her to sign it.
There you go.
She was like, oh no, I'm not worthy. I don't have a signature or anything.
Yeah, they always say that.
But she did it. And then she got the fever because next thing you know, people are walking by. Hey, have you seen the comic I'm in? And so, because at the time she was teaching school, and so she had no idea really what I was working on that much. And her students found out I was doing comics, and they'd say, well, what's he do? And she goes, oh, I don't know, Guardians of something. I was doing Guardians of the Galaxy at the time. And so she had to get a list from me of what I was working on. And so once she was free from the day-to-day drudge of being a teacher, and we were going to shows, and this has been like 13 years now, she's become more well-versed in that and has a lot more interest in what I was doing 30 years ago. Mm-hmm. And so it's been fun to see that, because I would use a lot of friends and relatives in these things. I had an uncle when I was doing Dallas. JR had a crooked, no good lawyer, and I used him as a model. And rather than being insulted, he was really flattered. That he got to be next to JR. And everybody else, I would stick friends in the chair next to Data's, because that was a rotating actor anyway. And so it was fun to bring this in, and to also, again, being mindful of this is a comic book, but it's also doing something with the show. So I could use camera angles that they couldn't use in the show, like Picard's Ready Room. I mapped it out, and I was able to do certain angles that couldn't be done.
Yeah.
And matter of fact, we got letters. I did one shot from inside the fish tank where Livingston was, the Japanese man of war.
Yeah.
And I had a shot going out, looking out from his tank into Picard's Ready Room. And I used a Gaussian blur on it because I had my computer. And it just blew people's minds, something so familiar to them could not be done on television, but we could do it there. Yeah. So it got my creative juices always wanting to what can I do without drawing too much attention to it? What can I do to bring people into that world where they're familiar with it on television, but here it is, that couldn't be done because of logistics of shooting the show.
Right, and that's the advantage of doing it from a different medium, because you can't do everything the same, and you can take advantage of this with the medium that you're in, and that's always great. But Star Trek had a lot of minor characters that just were popular, tied into the books, and just familiar with the fans, and they just loved them all. I remember collecting all the 9-inch doll figures and all the the 6-inch set of figures as well of all the Star Trek, and many of those minor characters were hard to find because they didn't really produce as much of them as they did with the other characters. And Ensign Rowe was one of them. That was a hard piece to get. Yeah, but yeah, great series. Loved it. I am a Star Trek fan as well as a Star Wars fan. I'm not. I don't have any preference. I just love the sci-fi genre. Not seeing much when I grew up, so I'm eating it all up now as I've grown.
Well, let's read some of the comments and questions. Like, first of all, I think Robin Fuller, Daryl, says she still loves her Ensign Rowe in the library piece from you. So.
Oh. Well, good.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's. Go ahead.
Oh, and also to answer your question, K-pop junkie. Yes, this is like it's a combination of white. What is this? Actually, it's a pastel and white pencil. Not quite charcoal. And I think the question from Kyle was, there was someone who did a lot of strip work. Like, who were your influences?
My first one, and I didn't know the name because they didn't give us names back then, and plus I couldn't read yet. When I was 4 years old, Zorro was on television. Oh. And again, you had to be in front of the TV 7:30 on Thursday night. Otherwise, you had to wait till the summer reruns. But one thing that comics did was they were able to revisit television shows and movies. And so my mom got me the first issue of Zorro, which I still have, drawn by Alex Toth.
Oh, wow.
And the thing that captivated me was the illusion of movement across the page with no real movement. And that got me really interested in continuity and in doing artwork that could use the same characters over and over. And again, I couldn't give utterance to the camera angles or any lighting or anything like that, but I saw that and I loved it. So I started doing my own comics then. And so Alex Toth, I think the next big influence would be Steve Ditko.
Okay.
And I loved his storytelling as well. And, he was a good artist, but the storytelling is what really grabbed me. And I think that's something in the industry that is kind of lacking these days. You have great, draftsmen out there, really beautiful stuff, but they don't really tell a story.
No.
And so, when I was doing this stuff, and I could corral Marcia, my wife, and say, I would take a page to her and say, tell me what's going on here, because she didn't follow comics at all. And if by looking at the sequence on the page, if she could tell me what was happening, then I knew I was successful, because she didn't have, all that hidebound history of a character. She would just see what she saw and could tell me if I'm telling a good story. And so Jack Kirby, of course, was an overwhelming influence. I think he kind of redefined the visual language of comics in the way he did things. His storytelling and his forced perspectives and the action and movement that he conveyed on a page, and seemed to break free of the page because he would be so dynamic. That was there. And then when I was in junior high, Neil Adams came along, and Neil was I had seen his work on Ben Casey when I was a kid, because we had the daily strip in our newspaper. But he did, some very, what appeared to be very realistic work, but he combined the dynamics of of Jack Kirby
Yeah.
and the storytelling skills of Steve Ditko. And then he and Jim Steranko went back and forth a little bit on their storytelling things that kind of shook the industry up. And so those were probably my biggest influences. And I think, you know, there's always people in there that come along that you can take something from them. I noticed when I was doing my cartoon work, years later, I looked at it and I thought, oh, I'm doing Don Martin ears, and had forgotten that that's where that influence came from.
Yeah.
So, you know, it's just, you absorb a lot of them, but I was really conscious of Toth and Ditko and Kirby and Neil Adams. And of course, you look at Will Eisner, which wasn't really all that available to me as a kid, but I've seen it since, and you realize the storytelling is where it's at. And that's where I think today it's missing. You'll see a page and it'll be a wonderfully, you know, rendered figure of a hero, and you see the veins in the arms and everything there, and it'll be a giant pinup almost with a bunch of little panels on the side. And it's as dynamic and as nice as that looks, it doesn't really tell a story. And I think that's sad, because comics are unique in the sense that they give you an opportunity to tell a story that you can't do in movies, you can't do on TV, you can't do in animation. You know, it's there and it's unique. And I think that uniqueness has been ignored.
Yeah, I agree with you.
I agree with you.
There, and that's what makes it hard for me to read a lot of the comics that are out today. I just don't have that feel for the story that's in there, even though some of them are good.
Maybe that's why, Mel, the Japanese, like, just plain black and white manga is having an appeal here, because sometimes it's really not about the art, and most of the time it's really not about the art. It's about telling the story. So there's heavy focus on the story, and then the art is the one that supports it.
I have my views on the anime manga stories, and they might be telling some of the better stories, but there's a part of it that I don't really care for either. That's why I'm not a big fan of the anime manga stuff. Doesn't mean that I don't watch or read. I do, just not as much. So somebody earlier had asked Daryl, what DC titles have you worked on?
DC, I was kind of limited. I did Star Trek Next Generation for a couple of years, did a couple issues of Wonder Woman, the Prince book, and then there's some stuff that never saw the light of day. DC was going to relaunch the MLJ characters. When I had worked on The Fly for Archie Red Circle, you know, probably about 10 years earlier, and they were going to redo that. So Steve Carr and I did an issue of the American Shield completely.
Yeah.
And I was working on, they were going to launch these characters again in a mini series. And so I was working on the mini series that was going to launch these characters. But they decided at the time, after a while, even though we were paid for this stuff, that no, the market wasn't right for these characters again. They had tried under the Impact brand a couple of years before that to relaunch them, but they just didn't apparently know what to do with them. So that's something I found interesting in the industry. There's so much stuff that never sees the light of day that I think has great potential.
Yeah.
Oh, also, I did Blue Beetle with Steve Englehart.
Okay.
And that was another thing that kind of died a mourning, because when I auditioned for the Blue Beetle stuff, they took the pages, and this is something I'm very proud of. They took the pages that I did and others did to Steve Ditko, because he had originated the new Blue Beetle. And Steve picked my stuff. And so I was offered the monthly title, and Len Wein wrote that, or a weekly title. And this is before Action Comics Weekly. There had never been a weekly comic book from DC before. So naturally, I jumped on the weekly and worked on about 7 issues of that. And also there was going to be in there, I think Paul Chadwick, who did Concrete, was going to do the question. And they had a bunch of us on it. And again, they decided not to do that. And whenever I would see Dick Giordano, he said, "Oh, I love this stuff. I want to get it into an annual or something," but it just didn't go. So I did a Western called Jericho Pine, was the first printed stuff I did for DC. And I did a Batgirl story and some other things. But largely, I think most of my time was spent in the Star Trek universe, a couple of years worth. We did the monthly book, and now I look back on it and doing 24 pages of pencils and inks, likenesses, equipment, and everything. I'm amazed that I had time for anything else. I couldn't do that today.
Did you, as a comic artist, though, because comic artists tend to do a lot of, it's not realistic realism, but with Star Trek, wasn't it kind of strange because it is about, you do have to be realistic to a degree. So were you frustrated? Like, it has to be so perfectly real?
I had cut my teeth on the Dallas strip, so
Yeah.
I was used to realism, and my stint as a portraiture artist got me that experience. And I think it's probably one of the reasons I got the strip. And so it wasn't that frustrating. There wasn't much room for action. So when there was, like spaceships blowing up or something happening like that, I really got into it. And then when it came to things like where there were fights, I could be a lot more dynamic than they could be with the camera on television. So I got my, if there were any frustrations, I worked them out that way.
I see.
And I also had to worry about equipment as well as likenesses. One thing that was interesting was I rarely had any changes because the stuff had to be shown to DC Comics, Paramount Studios, and then the individual actors. And I was going along doing well. And then early on, Patrick Stewart did his first American television interview on The Tonight Show.
Yeah.
And Johnny Carson was still the host, but it was on a Monday, so Jay Leno was there. And he went on, and I've seen Patrick Stewart interviewed many times. He's very good. He's very erudite. He's funny. He's engaging. But this night, it was his first one, and he was going on about how proud he was to be a socialist, and he was very manic. And I just thought, boy, that's odd. Well, I found out later on through sources that the next day after that Tonight Show appearance, he was being teased about it quite a bit. And he wasn't very happy. And they chose then to bring my pages in. And he looked at it, and I don't like this one. Change this one. I don't want lines on my face. And
oh my God.
So I was told, from now on, when you do Patrick Stewart, don't do lines on his face. And I don't want to get too technical for the audience out there, but being an artist, being able to draw lines on the face is pretty important. So I had to come up, I used my Crow Quill pen, and I would use little dots, pointillism, to define shadows and things on his face. And
oh my God,
it worked out. But then once you do that on him, you have to do it on people around him. And so I was doing that. And ironically, we got letters, people commenting on, because they had not seen that type of inking, because mostly traditional stuff is line work and hatching and so on. We got letters about the skeleton effect. It's like, oh, wait a minute, cavemen were doing this on walls back in the day. But I I grabbed a hold of that. And so whenever I see an art teacher, I always tell them, that pointillism thing you teach, well, that's the skeleton effect. And so the only other thing was when I was doing LeVar Burton, when I first started, it was doing fine. But then all of a sudden started getting changes. Make his nose smaller. Don't make his lips so big. And I thought, this is crazy because, he's a good looking guy, but he's obviously African American. But they kept having me change it. So I thought, you know what, next time I get Jordy, I'm just going to draw a guy with a visor. And then when they want their changes, then I can go ahead and do the likeness.
Oh, that's smart.
Well, the problem is the guy with the visor sailed on through. And I thought, this is insane. So I was on the phone, I was talking with the guy that was doing the covers at the time, and he was running into the same problem. And so he called up Paramount, and the phone was answered by LeVar Burton's people. And it just so happened in the background, he heard LeVar Burton walk in, and he said, "Oh, that looks great. I'd like to buy that when you're done with it." So that ended our problem because LeVar wasn't really looking at the pages, I guess. He was having his people do it, and his people felt that his lips were too big and his nose was too wide. And
wow.
And I received directives from Paramount, like when drawing Riker, that always draw him as if he has a broom up his ass. So, okay, I did that. But I noticed he had one eye that was, dipping a little lower than the other at times. And I thought maybe he had, Epstein-Barr or something at some point in his life. But they said, oh, what? No, his eyes were the same. But his, okay, So as the series went along, it was evident that the women, the actors, were going to the gym, and the men were going to the buffet. So their uniforms were designed a bit different. The arrows going down for a slimming effect. So I went ahead and I made sure that they were on a good diet. And because go back and look at it, and you can see the progression, of the series if you have it on disc or something. So really, it wasn't, except for those things were few and far between. For the most part, it was really fun to do that, and I prided myself on doing good likenesses, and also having them, like when they would be in a phaser battle, I could have their faces contorted and still have it look like them. And I made sure I got into the research of it, and the ocudograms, the things that were on the wall and the screens behind them. I made sure that the ones in sick bay were sick bay ocudograms. The ones on the bridge were from the bridge, and so on. And I don't know how appreciated that was, but I wanted to leave, I guess it's a legacy is too strong of a word, but I wanted to leave behind something that I could be proud of.
Yeah. Wow.
Fantastic.
So did you end up having a model of the ship at least to help you in perspective? Did you buy?
Yes, I did. I had a model of the bridge as well.
Wow.
That I could go in and do different angles. And those action figures, that he mentioned, I used because I could get whatever angle I wanted for like Picard or whoever, and just take a picture of it and have a reference that would be unique. So they had, unlike Dallas, they had a lot of good, I could make a lot of good references from things like that. And so it was fun. It was just keeping in mind that, okay, they're going to see this. And after a while, I didn't worry about that. But you can imagine being an actor, you have a certain level of vanity. And if you see a sequence of panels where you're represented there, you want to make sure that your weight's down and your muscles are up. And
Were the women more as picky as the men?
I'd say less so. I can't recall ever having to redo any women. I did on other people's stuff. I ghosted some pages for that the editor would give me. Here's some pages from a Star Trek special. There were complaints about the women, but I didn't draw those people. But they had me redraw. So you'll see in some of the Star Trek books, you'll see my faces uncredited, which is fine. I mean, that's part of the nature of comics, is that there's stuff that's done by other people all the time. So there was nothing, implied there. And you never know, maybe that actor had a bad day or something that day. But no, the women were really good. And then, Marcia was there with them at times. And so that was interesting. She was a part of a 3-issue story arc where her plight was the key to the success of getting rid of the monsters. So
okay.
it was fun.
Were the actors that you drew, because it looks like you had to draw them as accurate as you could, were they getting paid extra for being in the comic book?
I think not. I think they had, licensed toys and action figures and covers and things. So I think, that was probably negotiated as part of it. It was interesting in Dallas, Larry Hagman and all the other main actors had the standard contract. So I drew them all the time. But minor characters like J.R. Secretary, well, her contract didn't include that. So I used an old girlfriend as reference.
Interesting. Okay.
For J.R. Secretary. And I used, like I said, my uncle for a lawyer. I used different people. And you would think it would be just the opposite. The big stars would be the ones that, would be difficult to deal with. But there were just a lot of little caveats. Things like when you draw South Fork Ranch, you cannot draw the entire structure in one shot. You can only do parts of it. And there was one odd directive. I couldn't draw Worf and Geordi in the same panel. I have no idea why.
Wow.
As far as I know, the actors got along just fine, but
yeah, they're good friends. Yeah.
Yeah. So there were just directives that came down that, you learn not to question things, but it's like,
right.
Huh? And so
somebody was jealous.
Yeah. Or it could be somebody's people were jealous of somebody else's people.
Yeah. That's what I'm thinking.
Yeah. So it was an interesting experience, I'll tell you that. But no, I enjoyed the nuts and bolts of the research, as well as trying to make sure it was entertaining to both comic book people and to other people. One of the problems is that it was not considered a cool book because it wasn't superhero. So early on, I noticed a lot of my backgrounds were dropping out. And I had come from a long line of having things printed in newspapers and magazines and so on. Yeah. So I asked what the DPI was, and they told me, and I couldn't figure out why. Well, later on, some of the stuff would turn very dark. And I found out that since Star Trek was not a cool book, instead of using the stat cameras they would use for the other comics, they would send it across the street to a quick print place.
Oh no.
And having worked a stat camera myself, you have to make sure the aperture is closed enough, and you have to make sure you flash it if it's a dark drawing and so on. And so it drove me crazy because I was doing screens down to 55 DPI, which is what they were using in newspapers of the day. And it was still, funny. And so the idea of it being cool, not a cool book, was kind of detrimental at DC. They didn't think enough of it to really take care on some of it. And so I would do signings at stores. And when I was, at Marvel, I did some X-Men stuff, and tons of it. X-Men was everywhere. But when I would do a Star Trek signing, they would say, well, we're having a hard time finding your stuff. And I said, I saw the sales figures and we were doing quite well. And I said, it shouldn't be too hard to get. I said, how many books do you order a month? And they said, well, about 10. And I said, and it sells out every month? They go, yeah. And I said, well, I've got an idea. Next month, why don't you order 11? Because it was selling out. And then they would complain, well, people come in and they buy your book and they don't buy anything else. And I said, well, you have an opportunity to sell action figures, spaceship models, turn them, show them Star Wars, show them other science fiction comics, because apparently Star Trek was selling well. Next Generation was selling well.
Oh, yeah, it was.
But they weren't buying their usual 6 X-Men books a month. So there was kind of a prejudice there, starting at DC Comics itself with the reproduction, going down to the stores themselves. Now, I think these days the story would be different because they sell all different kinds of comic books, not just superhero stuff. And they sell things, they have magic cards. They've got all kinds of things that they do. The smart shop owner sells a lot more than just comics. Right. But back then people were just buying things with their heart. The owner would buy every X-Men foil embossed, multiple cover things to sell. But here's something, even though it was selling out every month, well, it wasn't a cool book. So, that's too bad, because I think that, they needed to expand like they do today to make a living, to survive.
The model and the way how a comic retail shop is run back in the 80s and 90s to the way how it is now has changed drastically. I had my own shops for about 16 years, and I can say that the changes are really, really big. We tried to carry everything. Not everything was available to us, and then, or it was we weren't favored, even though I felt that we should be the shops to carry a lot of that other merchandise related to comics, but not necessarily comic books. So it was hard. But now when you walk into a shop, you see everything in there. You see the collector card games, the figures, novels, all kinds of other stuff that you didn't see before. So, yeah. We're going to take another break, but before we do,
let's read some of the. Okay.
What do you want to do? Go ahead.
No, just some of the comments here is interesting. Like John Stout said, his shop would not exist without magic cards.
Oh yeah.
Like, I guess those cards, Magic the Gathering is,
Yeah, I gotta say too that at that time when Magic was coming out, it was tough. During that time, for the comic industry, we were kind of like a little bit in a slump, and Magic actually saved me, right? Because I became such a big dealer, in Magic, and that was I came out with around antiquities, so I wasn't too far from the beginning, and had access to all that stuff. Banked it on Legends. And that just did phenomenal. I took a big risk in that, but it paid off really well. So yeah, I was in the same boat. Magic saved my butt there. If I didn't have that, I may have closed, right? And then there's a couple of things that happened after that. Image was coming out with a second wave of books. that I banked on and did go down, like Gen 13, Kindred, and Danger Grove, that kind of stuff. But yeah, so that, just the changing times of the market, the stores, and what was going on. But anyway, like
Also,
go ahead.
Also, Robin Fuller says her dad says hi to you, Daryl.
Oh,
Oh,
yeah.
okay.
Earl.
Yeah,
So-
Earl says hi.
Oh, Earl, yes.
Yes.
How's he doing? We haven't seen him in ages.
He's actually worried about you.
He was looking for you.
He said, I haven't seen, I'm quoting him, I haven't seen Daryl for ages. So he was like, where is he? Is he sick? But.
Well,
Yeah.
I have been, but at the same time, it's just, and it's forced me to cut back on my convention schedule a lot. I'm
That's
doing this next month early. I'm doing Denver and then Council Bluffs, Iowa, and then Ocon. But for the most part, yeah, I've had to cut back on the schedule. But yeah, we love Earl. We haven't seen him in a while. We would always tease each other. Like Jim Shooter, who had hired me at Marvel, I was sitting next to him one time, and Earl came up and was kind of surprised, and was razzing Jim Shooter about me. And
Mhm.
Jim goes, "Well, that's why I hired him." So, yeah, I had, because I grew up when I did, I had all the old comics, and he was always looking for some grail, like Fantastic Four number 25. And it's like, oh, I've got that, Earl. I've got this. I've got that. And I've done different covers for him, like Spider-Man 5 with Dr. Doom. I did my version of Ditko's cover, and things like that. But yeah, Earl it got to the point where it was kind of like Norm on Cheers when he would show up, everybody go, Earl.
Yeah.
And so I'm glad to hear from it.
Good. You're not going to be in Las Vegas next weekend?
I'll be here, but and number one, they didn't really ask me, but number two, I wasn't sure of my schedule at the time, because most of the cons schedule, a little further ahead. But yeah, say hi to Jimmy J. I do like that. Some of our best cons have been here, especially when he was at the South Point. I think it was probably in our top 5 for years. So he puts on a good show.
Yeah, he does. He definitely does. We're big supporters of his, and we will always be. He's always treated us nice. We like the quality of the shows that he has. It's not just about the money, but just trying to make sure that everybody has a good time and good value for what they pay for.
Yeah.
We appreciate that.
Yeah, so say hi to Jimmy J for me.
Okay. And also, Robin, she replied and said, Earl, he's doing great. And but he was worried about you for a bit. So it's good now. Yeah.
Okay, so we are going to need to take a
he said,
short break.
Kyle said, let's just skip the last break.
Okay, well, I need to take a break.
Oh, you need to take a break.
Yeah.
Sorry, Kyle.
Okay, so
let's take that bathroom break.
Let's go ahead and show what everybody's got so far. Starting with Jen, who currently has a bid of 150 on that.
Woo-hoo, yeah, baby.
Look at all that hair, baby.
Do Moon Maid next.
Okay. 150 is the bid that we have on that. So we are looking for the next bid of 155 on Breathless Mahoney. We are still looking for a bid of $100 on Moon Knight Coming Out of the Dark, if you dare. It's got a little cityscape action in the bottom there. Okay, looking really good for Moon Knight.
You like it?
Glad to see you're working negative.
Yes. That's a funny story. We'll talk about that later.
Okay. All right. And Daryl, did you get started on your Iron Man?
I've drawn 2 lines.
Look at that. That's looking good right there. Okay, we'll give Daryl a shot at that. Okay. So don't go away. We'll be right back after this short break.
Boring old Tuesday. Kick it!
Anyway, let's get to it.
Henri Copen scours collections and comic shops to bring you the biggest deals on beautiful comics.
I'm very eager to sell these books.
Plus, he smashes those other boring sales shows. Henri's got fire, excitement, personality, key books, FOMO books,
Sexy FOMO books for ya.
a cute dog, weird accents,
69, bro.
a wheel of skid bark.
We do wheel spins at the end of every show.
You'll laugh, you'll cry, you'll score huge bargains.
That is Haktua magic right there, all right?
Kicking it with Henri, Tuesday nights, part of the experience. Live from New York. What? Oh, sorry. Live from Cleveland? It's Friday night? It's Friday Night Live! With Nancy McCann. And Ricky. And sometimes Carlos. And featuring boxes and boxes of rare comics. Unique collectibles. Lots of smiles and conversations with new friends. Friday Night Live with Comics Unlimited. Friday night from 9 to 11 on The Experience.
Welcome back, everyone. Thanks again for joining us on SketchUp. We've been talking with Daryl Skelton, who's been telling us some very interesting stories.
But yeah, they made. I think it was. I don't know, somebody. I think maybe it was Kyle, or maybe it could be somebody else who made a comment saying, "Daryl, you're so. I bid $10 for Mel to cook Daryl dinner, and we streamed the chat over food." But Daryl, you're so entertaining with just your thing. They say Daryl does not need to even draw. All he has to do is talk, tell his amazing, all these stories. It's enough. The show is enough. Just
yeah. Here's the funny thing. Okay, so Thomas Doherty was supposed to be on this show as well. Okay, and he had to cancel out. Right. And they were suggesting that I bring like somebody else. And I said, no, I don't think so, man, because I think we're going to be able to get enough from Daryl that'll keep the whole show entertaining for the 2 hours that we're going to be on here. I know he's going to have stories and we're going to have be interested in what he has to say and stuff. So, oh, yeah. I said, no,
we got talking about our medications and doctor's visits.
Yeah, just leave, just, we're just the audience at this point. Daryl, you're so good.
But just to make it a little interesting, because I actually had intended to do this, right?
Oh.
But okay, this is a metal print we're going to offer up here. It's $40. One of covers that Mog had done. So if you're interested in that, so you can just say Harlequin for $40, and that is yours. Okay, and then the next piece, we have a Batman metal print that also is available at $40. This is a new batch of metal prints that we got and that we're going to start taking around to the shows. So if anybody's interested in those, you can claim those in the comments. And then one final piece. This is a rare piece. Okay. I don't know why Mog's laughing. Okay. But this is her artwork. Okay. But what makes it rare is this is colored by me. Okay. So we're going to start this off at 100 and see where that goes.
Oh my God.
Should have had this on there sooner.
I don't think
but if you want that, you can place the bid in the comments. Just say Mel 100. Right?
No.
Show me some love, guys. Show me some love.
Oh man.
I know you guys love me, but now we're gonna see how much you do. Okay.
Oh, I don't think you should.
All right. Okay. So One other question I wanted to ask you, Daryl, is that you worked with Jim Starlin and Ron Mars on Infinity Gauntlet. How was that? How was the dynamics with that, working with these two great writer artists?
It was different because, unlike most of the Marvel scripts I would get, they would have a full script. And I can see the difference now, looking back on what Jack Kirby and Steve Ditko and those guys were doing. They rarely got a full script. And there's two ways of looking at it. One is like, great, I don't have to think. I can just worry about the rendering, the draftsmanship. And then on the other hand, it's like, well, wait a minute, wouldn't it be better if we did this, kind of thing. But they both had a thing where they knew their material so well, and they knew their characters so well.
Yeah.
You felt confident that you didn't have to fix anything in that regard. And one thing, I've had several times, where like Julie Newmar and others have complimented my work. But the ones that mean a lot was I had not met a lot of the writers I worked with till sometimes decades later.
Wow.
And so one of them was, I went up to Jim Starlin at a convention in Vegas a few years back, and I had a copy of Warlock that he wrote, that I drew. And of course he wouldn't know who I am. And I go, oh, could you sign this for me, please? And I told him who I was.
Yeah.
And I was surprised to say that, I had done a lot of Infinity Gauntlet cleanups, like, the Silver Surfer right after Thanos, and we destroyed Thanos' space station, but after they killed off Thanos for who knows how many times. And he said, yeah, he'd seen that stuff, and that's why he picked me. And that, whoa.
Wow.
I thought, it was just tossed out by an editor. And the other one, the big one in my life was, I had gotten to know, starting in 2012, just about every convention I went to, Neil Adams was there.
Right.
And I realized that the key to Neil Adams was realizing he loved to bust your chops. And
Yeah.
he loved to have his chops busted. And I found the more I insulted Neil, the better he liked me, which is pretty odd. But and then
to me, that's what it's like with all the New Yorkers, right? Because that's been my whole experience with New Yorkers. Yeah, sure, they bust your chops, but if you bust theirs down too, then it's like, yeah, okay, we're equal now.
Yeah, he was really good with that. But right before that time, I had been in comics for a number of years, and I was in San Diego, and I went into this stairwell, and there was Neil talking to a guy looking at his portfolio. And this is at a time when he and Dick Giordano had Continuity Associates. Okay. And so I had done a lot of commercial work outside of comics, and I thought, oh, here's my chance to do something for Continuity. So I waited till he was done, and I said, oh, Neil, are you looking for guys for Continuity? And he said, no, I was just destroying that guy's life. I said, oh, okay. And he said, well, let me see your portfolio anyway. So he flipped through it, and he said, well, obviously there's nothing I need to tell you, but no, I'm sorry, I'm not looking for anybody now. And right away I thought, oh, too bad. I would have liked to have done Continuity. Then I realized the next day, if the 12-year-old me knew that one day Neil Adams would say to me, there's obviously nothing I need to tell you, I probably would have had my first orgasm. But he that was and over the years, I've seen how that compliment grew, because, he made Frank Miller cry. I mean, Neil would just be brutal to people to help them, he wouldn't just totally destroy them, but
it's his tough love.
He made Frank Miller cry?
When he first came to him, yeah, showing stuff, he just ripped him up. Because, you know, by the time you get to the point where you think you can talk to Neil, you think, well, I'm doing pretty good now. You know, he might say, you know, we'll fix that ear or something, but they don't realize he'll take a flamethrower and go over your stuff. I was in Vegas, and Neil had stopped by before that and saw my posters, and he said, you know, you get $40 for that? And I go, yeah, Neil, we all can't be you know. But there were these two editors that had seen him years earlier, and he ripped him a new one. And they had their graphic novel all ready to go, but they knew they were ready now. And they went walking by, and I said, you guys sure you want to do this? You know? Oh yeah. They go up, and pretty soon they come back with their heads down, you know, because Neil went through and gave them the Neil treatment. But you should learn, you know, like in Albuquerque one time, I was carrying some stuff out, and Neil's kids were there with him too, two of his sons, and they were sitting around talking, and the show was over, and his wife was busy filing things and everything, and I was carrying my stuff out. And I had said to him earlier at another show, I said, Neil, I thought you had minions to carry your stuff out. And he said, no, you got to keep making money. And so I was carrying stuff out, and he made some crack about me having to carry things. And I just said, well, Neil, some of us don't have our wives do all of our work for us like some people do. And his boys laughed, and he laughed. You know, he thought that was great. But later on, you know, I got to, we would talk, and once you're in, you know, he'll tell you stuff about his past and so on. And it was very interesting.
He's a talker. Yeah.
So like Marcia one time in Denver, you know, he kicked at the end of the show, he was kicking some boxes out, and Marcia wanted to know if she could have them. And I said, well, Neil, do you have any boxes that Bill Sienkiewicz kicked around? Because I think those would be a better fit for us. He loved it, you know.
Yeah. Yeah. You just kind of joke with him the same way that he does with you and stuff, come down on him. Yeah. So, well, what about Ron Mars? Did you do much with him?
I just did an issue of the Silver Surfer. And again, it was quite different than most Marvel scripts, because, you know, like I'd get an X-Men thing, and it would be, you know, several paragraphs, and you paste the story out and everything. And Ron wasn't as detailed as like some people would be, but he would have so much more detail than the other Marvel writers. He would have a panel and page breakdown.
Oh, wow. Okay.
And so the thing I appreciated about his work more than that detailed breakdown would be the emotion he would put into the characters and the motives. And that made it easier to visually, you know, have expressions prepared. Whereas in other things, you, the artist, were pretty much dictating, you know, the expressions, the reactions, and so on. Yeah. And then the writer would try to fill in stuff
right
afterwards. So yeah, I liked his detailed breakdowns, but I'm more impressed by the we did an origin of a character. I can't remember her name now, but it was the first appearance of this character, and she had been rebuffed by the Silver Surfer as one, and then a character came along. One thing that was interesting about that story was there was a character called Master Hate, and I called up my editor, and I said, we don't have a Master Hate. There's a Mistress Hate. And they said, well, we'll get back to you. And they called me back later on saying, it's been determined that hate can appear as either male or female. And so I realized there were things like that. Being as old as I was, I would catch a lot of things because I'd been around for so long that the editors sometimes didn't see. So that's how Master Hate came to be, is because Ron wrote it, and he didn't know that there was not a Master Hate, and the editor didn't know either.
Interesting. Stevie B writes, I took my young son to his first big Apple Comic Con, and Neil was there. I told him Neil was one of the greatest Batman artists. Neil corrected him and said, the best Batman artist. That is so Neil. Okay. So Neil.
Yeah. I went in when I turned 65. There was a convention in Vegas, and I walked in and I go, oh, Neil, I'm going to get some of that sweet Medicare and Social Security money now, just like you. And he takes his arm and he goes, feel this, feel this. And I felt it and I go, oh, that's pretty good, Neil, but that's the hand you draw with. Feel this one. You know, it just, he was a character.
Yeah, he was. And Jared comes on here. He says he has the Prince book by you and signed. So thanks for coming on the show and sharing that.
Wow.
Oh, yeah. Appreciate that.
Yeah.
Yeah. I go ahead.
I'm surprised that you're not going to be at your home state in the new con that's Comic-Con Nebraska. Did you hear about that one?
There's one that I used to go to at Grand Island, and I think this one, if I'm not mistaken, is in that area, in the Tri-City area. But
it's in Omaha, and it's started out by these guys that originally started Emerald City, Calgary Expo, and Rose City. So they're starting something new.
Okay.
Yeah,
sure I haven't heard of it. There was one I used to go to, and they quit doing that one, but they started a new one. And I was invited, but it ended up being the same time as WonderCon. And so it was just a matter of logistics.
Yeah,
I like to go back then. I notice nowadays, ever since COVID, and you've probably noticed this too, shows just, when they do a show, they don't coordinate to make sure this show doesn't conflict with that show.
There's just way too many shows now, and it's hard. Like next weekend, you got Heroes Con, you got the Las Vegas Con, some other cons, and there's also another one going on here called Whittier Con, and there's even more popping up. Some, they're much smaller shows, but they are being competitive in a way. So, yeah, it is hard to schedule. It used to be you'd have to you could attend all of them, but now you got to really think about like what you're doing and see if you're going to be able to do it. Even like next year, we have I think like C2E2 and MegaCon are on the same weekend. How do you decide that now? And along with another con is another decent big con is on the same weekend again too. Now you've got to decide which one of those do you want to be at.
Yeah, to me, there's some sentiment involved. I've gone to certain shows that financially they may not be the best, but they took me in early on, and I really appreciated that loyalty. And I've seen families, for instance, in Albuquerque, I've seen little kids grow up that are now in college.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
And you see, and I guess maybe it's part of getting older, but there's a certain sentimentality I'll have over different shows. Whereas others, like Jay Lee, Marcia asked him one time, he's from here in Vegas, and he'd be offered different shows at the same time. And she goes, well, which one, how do you decide? And he goes, whoever pays me most, so sometimes it's really easy that way.
Yeah.
But I have a sentiment for some things. Same with doing sketches. Now, you wouldn't know it here because I've been yammering on because you let me. I don't quite draw as much, but I will find myself doing a sketch and putting people are always telling me, you're doing too much in there, But I like what I'm doing. It's, I alluded to something Mog was doing with drawing negative. There was a Spider-Man cover I did that was that way. And I put more into it than I'm supposed to for the money, I guess, when Marcia sees it or some others.
Yeah.
But I enjoy, being as old as I am, coming up with new approaches and new ways of doing things. Something that Neil did that, you know, he's Neil Adams, but like one time he had a show where he prepared in advance a bunch of Batman sketch covers, a special for only $250. And it was the same Batman profile headshot over and over and over again.
Yeah.
And, you know, he's Neil, he can do it. And everybody would be happy to spend $250 for a Neil Adams sketch cover, especially Batman. But if I were Neil, I'd be so bored doing that same headshot over and over and over again. But again, he was Neil Adams and I'm me. So, you know, you can question the wisdom of that. But I enjoy getting creative juices going. I enjoy different approaches to things. I enjoy finding new materials to work with.
I think that's one of the better things to do because it can get monotonous. You know, it's that rule that 95% of the time you're just doing the work and just trying to crank it out, and 5% is fun. But you got to find something in it that's going to make it interesting for you as the artist, so that way you can continue to have that passion and that creativity. Even if, I think I talked about this the last time too, even if it's just like drawing a belt buckle, draw that belt buckle as best you can as you've never done before. And then you can say, yeah, that belt buckle is going to make this page, this panel, or whatever it is that it's on, you know.
Yeah, I actually got letters one time on Dallas. There was a thing, and Miss Ellie takes a pie out of the oven. And so I drew it from the pie's point of view. You're looking from inside the oven out, and she's reaching in and taking it.
There you
know,
go.
no big deal, but somebody actually took the time to write a letter to comment on the way Miss Ellie took the pie out of the oven.
Mm-hmm.
You know,
Wow.
Yeah. That's going to be like a cool shot, seeing that hand reaching in there and eyeball, checking it out and stuff through the mist, if you may have drawn that. But yeah, things like that just opens it up, give you a different look, different perspective, seeing things from that different angle. Just makes it more interesting, not just to you, but to the readers as well. Right, so we are looking for the next bids on this. Everybody has a bid. Daryl has a bid from Stevie B of $100. Jen is holding at a $150 from the lieutenant, and Ilya has a $100 bid on Mog's Moon Knight.
What?
Yeah.
I was hoping to sell this at Heroes Con.
Oh well.
Thank you, Ilya.
Yeah, so everybody's getting a steal of a deal still, right? And Jen, can you tell us? You were telling me some interesting stuff. Tell me what's going on with you and what you got coming up.
I've got 2 conventions I'm going to be doing later on this year. Both of them are going to be in Pigeon Forge, Tennessee, and it's the first weekend of October and the first weekend of December.
Now, one of those was sounding like it was going to be a Xenoscope kind of thing.
It's actually an anime and manga convention, but the guy that runs it is a huge Xenoscope guy, and so he's been talking to as many Xenoscope artists as he can, and he's got me and Greg Bow tabled next to each other, and then he said something about having some others, so I'm not sure who all's going to be there yet.
Oh, wow.
But by then I'll have a lot more Xenoscopes coming out too. I've got quite a slew of things coming out with him this year.
Fantastic. That Breathless is looking breathless.
very, very nice.
Fantastic. Okay. And my eyes are going to her lips. You know, those nice luscious lips that you got on there.
There you go.
It's working its way up to the eyes, and then that hair, especially that one curl that's right in between, falling down between her eyes. That's looking really, really nice there. All right, so we got a 150 bid on that. We are looking for the next bid. If you want to place a bid on that, we're looking for 155. looking for 105 on Moon Knight and 105 on Daryl's Iron Man, which Stevie B is taking a shot at. He says it's a shot in the dark, but I'm going to tell you that's not much of a shot in the dark once he's done with it. We've seen his work. We've known Daryl for a while and seen what he can do. You're going to be very impressed with that, Stevie B. All right, so next week we won't be here, but according to producer Kyle, it's gonna be ladies' night. K-pop Junkie is returning, Katie, and she's actually going to be drawing from what I hear. So that's going to be very interesting to see. Now, when we come back after that, we'll be at Heroes next week. So when we come back after that, we have Inland Blue Comics will be with us. And they are a local publisher here in California. Sorry, I lost my voice. Bear with me a moment.
You know what's also interesting was Daryl, you kind of mentioned it in the beginning. I had no idea that Jack Kirby's wife was really like fundamental in Jack Kirby being Jack Kirby. And then you also mentioned this other I forgot the name of the artist, but he's also his wife.
Yeah, Gene Colan.
Yes. Like really fundamental in helping them, be who they are. And that really just, again, kind of solidify how, isn't there a saying like, in every great man, there is a...
Behind every great man, there is a woman.
Yeah.
Trying to muck things up.
She was also, and again, so many fans they interacted with. I'm not unique at all in that regard. But like you'd go to their house and she wouldn't let you leave without a sandwich. But then she also kept an eye on things because like Jack would be drawing something. And one time it was a page for a book that hadn't come out yet. And the kid, really liked it. And so Jack just gave it to him. Well, Roz had to stand at the top of the stairs and make sure the kid didn't walk out with it because that has to be sent off to Marvel,
Oh.
And then she, like when they came to Vegas, everybody else, they fly them in and everything. Well, Roz drove and she had to drive everywhere because Jack, his mind was constantly working and he would like lose track of where he was and they'd end up on the curb or something. So she did all the driving.
Mm.
And
all right,
like,
anyway, Daryl, I'm sorry to interrupt you, but we
Sure.
are out of time here. Definitely want to have you back, and we can love hearing your stories, and hopefully we get to hear more when we see you at your con. So again, next week or in 2 weeks, find us back here. We will have Ron Mills from Inland Blue. We will have Robert Duke from Canada, and Mr. Fish and Todd Rayner will also be joining us. I want to thank everybody else for being with us again tonight. You guys have a wonderful evening. We'll see you in 2 weeks. Thank you. Special thanks to Daryl and Jen for joining us tonight.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
thank you.